Thanks a lot, Presley, and so this is our second topic, and we're going to talk about growing both blackberries and the raspberries. So you see the topic listed here is growing raspberries, because each presentation can potentially last quite a few hours, and so we'll focus on raspberries first, and then we'll kind of sprinkle some blackberry information throughout the presentation. As most of you know, blackberries and the raspberries are related. When you group both of them together, they are called brambles. And so I always tell people, what are brambles? And there are a bunch of bushes with a lot of nasty thorns. So that's assuming that we're talking about thorny varieties. So with blackberries, they're actually thornless blackberry varieties. And so, anyways, so this time we're going to focus on raspberries and the blackberries. And just with blackberries and for people that are thinking about blackberries and raspberries, and always try to get people excited. And there are all kinds of health benefits of raspberries and then blackberries for that matter. Some folks will like eating them fresh, and others will like making raspberry smoothies, and there are also people who like jams and jellies. There are fantastic preserves, and then there are people also enjoy raspberry wine. Uh, OSU has a long history of studying uh, raspberries. So back in the 80s and 90s, Dr. Gary Stoner of OSU Medical Center, he actually conducted a lot of studies on the health benefits of black raspberries. And there are also current studies on the use of black raspberries, raspberries in preventing various cancers, and more specifically oral cancers. Uh, and and then the value added product that I think I can get a lot of people excited is chocolate. I guess you call that convection, or chocolate uh, uh, or chocolate coated black raspberry powder confections, and so it's really neat. And they're also freeze dried, black raspberries, um, and all of that. So lots and lots of health benefits, and lots of exciting ways to eat them. Again, uh, uh, it's very difficult, and if while it's impossible to cover everything there is to know about raspberries and blackberries in 1 hour. So I listed quite a few fact sheets here. One of them is called Raspberries for the Home Fruit Planting, and that's on the home growing side. Maybe put Ryan to work, and maybe you could talk about our long cane raspberry production fact sheet.
Yeah, so Gary mentioned the long cane raspberry production. That's probably one of our most recent research studies that we've been working on. Got a grant a few years ago to look at it. It's pretty well-known system in Canada and other places, but relatively new to the United States. So the idea basically turns this perennial system of growing raspberries into an annual system. So much in the way that plasticulture strawberries kind of bumped out matted rose strawberries and turned strawberries into an annual crop. This is sort of the same situation with raspberries, and the fact that you purchase plants that have already been grown out a year, and they're approximately 6 feet tall. Typically, there's 2 canes per container. Well, you get them to your operation and pot them up further and grow them out through the season, harvest the fruit, and then most of the large growers are just composting plants at that point. But we do have a fact sheet out, and with the likelihood that there will be some more to accompany it, and because the system's quite complex. So stay tuned for more of those, but we do have one out for the production system.
Yeah, very good job, Ryan. And we also produce one BlackBerry production systems, and that came out, excuse me, came out a couple years ago. So, so it's a very comprehensive fact sheet on how to well the what are the common approaches for BlackBerry production in Ohio. And then in terms of bulletins, during our last session, we already mentioned the Midwest Home Fruit Production Guide, and that's a very comprehensive reference for home gardeners. And so it's really neat. It's been around for quite a few years, and I believe our publications, extension publications, sold maybe more than 6,000 copies over the years. And so very popular and very useful. And earlier today, I saw that Bill Johnson mentioned our bulletin to to hundreds of people uh, at his at his presentations. So very good, very pertinent bulletin. And then there is another one that could be downloaded online. It's called Raspberry and Blackberry Production Guide, published through Northeast Regional Agricultural Service and slash Cornell. So it's a very good bulletin, and you can download a free PDF version. And then if you wanted to get a hard copy, get hard copy, so you can order through Northeast Regional, whatever the agricultural engineering service, or you could just check to see if Amazon carries it. But anyways, so there are a lot of resources, and so if we missed anything, I'm sure I will miss a few things, but these are the helpful resources. Uh, that could be either purchased or downloaded. There are there are quite a few limiting factors and uh, for growing raspberries and the blackberries for that matter in Ohio. I would say probably the number one factor is soil drainage. Uh, Unlike blueberries, they need all kinds of stuff. With raspberries and blackberries, especially raspberries, if you don't have very good drainage, and plants will just die. So just that kind of just that simple. So for commercial production, you definitely wanted to select a site with excellent soil drainage or highly successful farms. They're they are mostly located in the area uh, with well-drained soil. And if they didn't have well-drained soil, they would build raised beds. And uh, and then there are a few other factors, and whether it's fluctuating fluctuating temperatures in winter and early spring. That's raspberries are very cold hardy, but once they reach once they get enough chilling hours and uh, uh, and then they can well once they reach the full dormancy they can be very cold hardy. So that's the good news. The bad news is uh, very cold hardy raspberries, and if you have cold temperatures and then you have warmer kind of Indian summer and then that will mess them up because they think summer is here, well, the spring is here, and they're ready to roll, and then the flower buds could be severely damaged if you have the fluctuating temperatures around late winter, early spring. So that's always uh, something to consider. And then too much rain, too much rain will be very hard on fruits, which could cause diseases. And then spotted wing Drosophila will get into the fruits, and that can hurt them pretty bad. And then weeds and wildlife, and those are all common things that could hurt fruit crops, including blackberries and the raspberries. So maybe Ryan, if you can talk about this a little bit, building raised beds and all that.
Sure. Yeah. Gary always likes to call this the Cadillac version of raised beds, but essentially what we've done here is um, kind of created our own growing situation. So in this situation, in the big picture, we've got some large landscape timbers. They're 4x6 treated posts that are approximately 12 foot long each, and we've kind of partnered them together to do a double layer. So the beds are roughly about 12 inches deep, not quite, but just about there, and then filled those beds with our own media. So we used some native topsoil that we purchased locally, and then amended with composted wood chips and some other materials just to add some organic material in there so that those beds were pretty well drained. And in a situation like this, it's quite expensive, number one, to buy the material to build all that versus just planting it in open field or, in your yard. However, ideal settings with this would be, just small scale production if you're doing it yourself and are wanting a little bit more controlled habitat for those to grow in. Urban farms would be a great setting here, whether it's I guess I kind of picture and know some sites that were built on old home sites, either been tore down and you're really questionable what kind of soil you'd be going into. So, something like this could be built on top of the soil there that you're concerned about, and then filled with a controlled media, or even in situations where it's a paved surface. You could plop this right down on top of a paved surface and fill those beds with some growing media. But again, it's kind of the most expensive option, setting yourself up. But it's something to consider if you're interested in doing something like that.
Yeah, good. Ryan being a very good carpenter, and I really enjoy watching him building our raised beds, and nice to see these pressure treated wood and turned into beautiful raised beds. And then we already for some of those that were here this morning, and these are kind of a duplicate slides, and so it's always good to build raised beds, and you can do that and without using these expensive lumbers. So the raspberries and their pH requirement it's not as strict. Raspberries and blackberries, so the requirements are not as strict. So we're talking about slightly acidic soil, maybe 6.5 or so. And so you can build, but building, if you didn't have the perfect soil drainage, and building raised beds is a must. And so there are all kinds of neat ways to grow them, and uh, and also the different benefits, uh, different benefits and all that. And so so I love these tall raspberries, and you can use them as a living hedge, and that produce a living hedge that produces tasty berries. So edible landscaping would be a good way to go. Yeah, maybe there are several different ways to describe raspberry types, and fruit color is one of them, and so it's really interesting to see the regional differences. So there are people that absolutely love black raspberries, and there are also people who absolutely adore red raspberries, and it's kind of uh, very rarely that there are people who like both. So, but anyways, there are also people who do not like raspberries at all. So that would be that's kind of interesting. So you have so there are red raspberries and black raspberries, and then purple raspberries. Purple raspberries are hybrids of black and red. And then there are also yellow raspberries. Yellow raspberries are just mutations of red raspberries. So that's you can separate them by color. And so maybe Ryan can talk about soil site selection a little bit. Uh,
Yeah, so Gary mentioned before some of the hangups with raspberries. As we talk about really any of these fruit crops, kind of that wet feet, the idea of wet feet, none of them really like that situation. And oftentimes I'll see growers, especially in a backyard setting, who have simply just kind of dug a hole and planted their plants right in the flat ground. And here in Southern Ohio and much of Ohio, we've got pretty heavy clay content, and a situation like that where the soil's hanging on to either rainwater or whatever for long periods of time. Raspberries in particular are very susceptible to root rot. So if you've gotten yourself into situations like that and you're seeing some plant decline, most likely it's because of phytophthora root rot just being in overly wet soils or poorly drained soils. So when you're thinking about a new planting, making those amendments, if you're in a heavy clay content, adding some organic matter just to boost that loaminess. Um, pH, ideally, again, we kind of reiterate that over and over again, but soil testing might seem complicated to some, but it's really not too difficult to do. And if you need help, a lot of times your extension office has some either tools or services that they can offer to help you with that. But it's really going to give you your baseline to look at your soil and the situation where you want to put in specific crops. Is your soil ready for that? And those recommendations will come back and really tell you, okay, if pH, if you're sitting between 6 and 6.5, then we're pretty good. But if you're lower than that or higher than that, then you're going to want to make some adjustments well ahead of time before planting. So, and then organic content. A lot of times I'll see soils around 1-2% here in Southern Ohio. So just making those amendments, adding some organic material to get that organic content up higher. As far as slope, the northeast facing slopes might be better for colder climates. And I like the picture there in the bottom, avoiding low areas. And Gary mentioned in the last presentations, do what we say, not what we do. And all of my fruit plantings at home are in this exact situation where we're at the bottom of the field. It's kind of that cold area where the frost settles. But I counted that's also where the best soil is on my particular location. So I kind of chose that over the potential for the frost damage. But if you can get in a situation where you're on a slope a little bit higher versus down at the bottom of it, that's ideal.
okay, very very good, Ryan. Because whether you are talking about a commercial operation or whether you're talking about a backyard kind of situation, probably one common question that we get is, I definitely get it, is how long, what's the longevity of a bramble planting, whether it's blackberry and a raspberry, and always tell folks these plants can last a long time. That's the good news. The bad news is Ohio has a lot of native native brambles. Native brambles have a lots and lots of viruses, and then the insect will transmit them back and forth. So, so realistically, for commercial growers, I would tell them after about 11, 12 years, they might want to look into uh, just rip out the old planting and then plant new virus indexed plants. Those will be much more productive, much more vigorous, and then the fruit quality will be much better too. So viruses can play a major role. So I would say somewhere between 10 to 12 years would be the economic lifespan of a blackberry or raspberry planting. And then we already mentioned about soil testing. It's always a good idea to do that beforehand. And depending on what whether we're talking about just a small planting in the backyard or commercial planting. For a large commercial planting, I would say a soil test should be done at least a year before, and sometimes even better yet, and 2 years ahead, so you can amend the soil and add the nutrients and also add cover crops and all that. But for home gardeners, definitely a 6 month or year would be better so you could do something about the soil. And then so these are the the raised beds. So when you build a raised bed, and it's a very important thing to do to to improve the soil drainage, but also keep in mind that what goes into the raised bed is equally important. If you just use the regular topsoil, because we always say, well, what's topsoil? And topsoil is just a soil on top. It's not necessarily an indicator for quality. So I would say loamy well amended soil would be much better. So if you just kind of use the regular topsoil, kind of clay that gets chopped up, and then you will still have issues. So make sure it's well amended soil, and uh, uh, and then you will be better off. So let's talk about kind of the biology, biology or life cycle. And maybe I'll put Ryan to task. Maybe you could say some things about the different types of canes.
Mhm. Yeah, so when we're thinking about different varieties, and we'll talk about this with blackberries as well, but there's a significant difference between primocane bearing varieties and then floricane. And there's a slide coming up that explains it, but essentially, your primocane is the cane of the plant that pops up in the first year. So that's your 1 year old cane. And as you can see there in the picture, it's got some labelings there. Uh, After you go through your first growing season, you're moved into your second season. That primocane turns into a floricane. So depending on the variety, you're going to have some primocane bearing varieties, which means that that first year shoot will bear fruit, and then in the floricane bearing varieties, that'll be a situation where you will not get fruit until the second year. So in those situations, that's a constant renewal of those 1 and 2 year old canes, but we'll get more in depth with that later.
And also, some of those canes will have, lateral branches. And so in the case of black raspberries, and they produce most of the fruits on these, what I call the fruiting laterals. And they will have some fruits on the main flora cane, but they will have a whole lot more fruits on the fruiting laterals. So just keep on going, and so there are flora canes, and then prima kings. So it's important to keep them, keep them straight. And then this diagram kind of helps, helps with pruning and also management. So depending on the types, on your right hand side, and we uh, when you have a floricane like this, and then growers will consistently chop off part of the cane. So if you were to chop off the top one-fourth, then you will likely lose about 15% of your crop. And then you might kind of wonder, like, why would anybody in the right mind want to do this? Well, for commercial production, yeah, nobody wants small and sour fruits, and everybody wants the brightly colored and then large and tasty fruits. So the top 15% you would sacrifice that, but your next 40% will get a chance to grow into really large tasty fruits. And for home gardeners, it's the same idea. And you can shorten the kings a little bit, and that will make it easier for you to reach the fruits. And if the kings are like maybe 6 foot tall, and then you wouldn't want to get a ladder to pick fruits. So it's much easier to have the fruits right close to the eye level. So it's easier to pick, and you also have these high quality fruits. And then you will have some, fruits toward the bottom. The quality of these fruits will be much, much lower. And then uh, the primocane bearing varieties, some of them will have fruits on top and during the first year, and then the flower buds on the bottom will come into fruit production the year after. And then the root distribution, this is heavily dependent on what kind of soil that you have. This is why it's so critical uh, to have perfectly wild drained soil. So because most of the roots are going to be in the top maybe 2.5 to 3 feet. I would say probably, yeah, see the 70% of them is in the top 10 inches. And then cultivar selection, we talk about different fruit colors, and then maybe a growth habit. Uh, so maybe Ryan, you could talk about primocane fruiting versus floricane fruiting.
Yeah, so I touched a bit about it earlier, but you know, with these primocane bearing varieties, they're going to fruit on that 1-year-old wood. So oftentimes we're going to look at uh, having some sort of trellis system that keeps these canes upright. Some of these are erect and self-supporting, but most are going to need some sort of physical structure to hold those canes up. So in the situation with these primocane raspberries, a lot of times growers will have a T trellis similar to the one that we saw earlier that was a part of that raised bed picture. Oftentimes with blackberries, the thornless blackberries in particular, those almost all of those need some sort of trellis. It's a little bit simpler. Typically, you'll see kind of a single line of wire that runs horizontally down through the canopy, and you might have two of those that you can simply attach the canes to hold them upright because some of them can be quite um, they can grow quite a bit and they can get kind of floppy. So in the situation with those thornless blackberries, they'll grow up and over and then they'll reroot themselves if you let them. So having something to hold those up, either whether you're doing the blackberries or the raspberries, is important. I think the picture there, judging by the thorns that I can see on the stem, is probably one of the primocane bearing blackberries, Gary. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
So, we'll talk a bit about varieties, but there are quite a few primocane bearing blackberries on the market right now. Some of them have some pretty nasty thorns on them. So, but I think we'll talk about some of those varieties later.
yeah. So there are primary fruiting varieties, and there are also floricane fruiting varieties. I mentioned a little bit about fruiting, fruit color, and we'll just go through a few of those. Himbo top is a common variety, and if anybody can pronounce this, and it was still bred in Switzerland, and so Himbo top is a very good variety for both field production and also high tunnel production. This one is relatively easy to remember. I just love Joan Jay because it doesn't have thorns. It may not be as productive as Himbo Top or Heritage, but for home gardeners, it's really neat that it's doesn't have thorns. It's a
Yeah.
primary bearing variety. Uh, Maybe Ryan can talk about Heritage.
Yeah, Heritage is it's an older variety, but it is still very productive. I know quite a few just backyard gardeners who have Heritage, and just every year very productive plants. Pretty prolific as far as growth. That's one situation where you might consider where you're going to plant it because these are hedgerow forming plants, they're going to send up shoots all over the place. So, that's always something to think about when you're going to put in a new site is this will spread through the ground, through underground roots. So you need to consider where to plant it, that you're going to be able to control it as well. But yeah, that's a really great variety. Just to back up to Joan Jay, I've made that recommendation to a lot of home gardeners, and I always get positive feedback on that Joan Jay. And with any of these raspberries, they have those little tiny prickles on them that make it kind of difficult to harvest. They're not as bad as some of the blackberries, but they can be a little bit of an issue when you're harvesting. But that Joan Jay being thornless is a really nice characteristic of that variety.
Yeah, speaking of Joan Jay, and so when we first got it, because sometimes people would describe these varieties that are thornless, and they may still have a little bit of stubs. And Joan Jay is truly thornless, and without wearing any gloves, and I tested these canes up and down, and yeah, just so neat um, to have canes that are thornless. Heritage is what I call the kind of a poster child for primary bearing red raspberry. It has the classic raspberry taste. Just absolutely love Heritage. And so I always, other than Joan Jay and Caroline, is supposed to be an improved version of Heritage, and so it's about 1 week earlier, so it's a little bit more tolerant of phytophthora root rot, but you still have to have very good drainage. And then there are a whole bunch of varieties developed in Poland, Polka, Polana, and so they are very cold hardy. And but the fruits, depending on which person you talk to, even when they say they are large, and they're not quite that large, so they're kind of on the smaller side. Maybe Ryan can talk about the fall gold.
Yep, so there's a few yellow varieties out now. Fall Gold Does relatively well here in Ohio. However, it doesn't seem to be as productive as some of the red raspberries are. Um, but my experience with the yellows, the flavor is a lot more mild on them, but they still have a nice kind of ra typical raspberry flavor as well.
So the yellow ones, yeah, I like them because they have mild flavor, um, but they are kind of very interesting looking plants. And yellow ones are just mutations of red raspberry varieties. So in terms of pruning and training, excuse me, pruning and training, and you treat them like red raspberries. So another good yellow, very popular yellow variety is Ann, and it's actually the leading yellow raspberry variety in Ohio. So canes are what's called semi erect, and which means they get pretty tall and they start flopping. So some kind of trellis would be very beneficial.
One variety, Gary, that I'll mention that it's not in the presentation, but it's called double gold. Um, it's another. I think it's considered a yellow. However, the color of it gets kind of a pink blush. So I'd almost consider it kind of a mix between like a red color and a yellow color. But that was one of the varieties that we trialed there at South Centers that did fairly well. Again, not as productive as some of the reds, but another very sweet one, kind of a mild flavor, raspberry flavor, but very, very pretty. I mean, if you've seen the fruit, it has this pink blush to it. They describe it as having kind of a champagne color, but really pretty fruit, pretty good, and pretty relatively productive for here in Ohio.
Yeah, with any of the uh, fruit varieties that we have, a lot of times because Ryan was there, was there about every day, and then he got a chance to taste them. And I always ask him, "Hey, how did they taste?"
Yep.
Right?
Perks.
Yeah, yeah. Ryan would say they taste great.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I wouldn't know. So very good. So double gold or
Double gold. Yeah.
double gold. And then moving on to purple raspberries, and there are several varieties. I can't remember how many that we have tried, but royalty is one of them.
Hmm.
Uh, do you remember us trying anything else?
No, it was just
Any
the
of the
royalty.
purple varieties?
Hmm.
I think the other common variety is it's called brandy wine. So let me see if I have this. Um, so I put this in there. Hey, what's the difference between a blackberry and a black raspberry? Black raspberry when you harvest the fruits, it's a hollow in the middle, so the fruit receptacle stays on the plant. But the blackberries, and they are solid in the middle, so the fruit receptacle is actually in the fruits themselves. So they stay on the fruit, and so there's no. So the black raspberries are also called black caps, because of this. So that's how you can tell. But both types belong to genus Rubus, Rubus, Rubus. Let's see. There are a few black raspberry varieties in Ohio, and so the uh, so the commercial growers really like Jewel and also Mac Black. So Jewel is a mid-season variety. Mac Black is a late season variety. I can't remember whether I had yeah, okay, yeah, I yes I do. Uh, so do you want to talk about the Niwat, Ryan?
Yeah, so with typical black raspberries, they're a floor cane bearing plant. So if we keep going back to that, that's 2-year-old cane. So we've got the primocanes coming up. We go into that second season. Typical black raspberries are floor cane bearing varieties. So it takes 2 years to get fruit off of them. However, there's been a couple varieties that have come out in the last few years that are primocane bearing. So that new shoot comes up and we will get fruit off of it. One of those is Niwat. Again, I wouldn't consider them as productive as maybe some of the older traditional floor cane varieties. But it's kind of nice just for a management situation. They're way easier to take care of than a floor cane bearing variety. So those are really nice. Gary, is Ohio's Treasure in your presentation?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We can if it does show up, and that means I was very well prepared, and if not,
So Ohio's Treasure is it's another variety that's been released relatively um, um,
oh, I do.
in the last few
Okay.
years. Okay, there we go. All right.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, time for a huge pay raise versus versus a versus a pay cut.
Yeah.
Just going back to NIWAD a little bit, and it's you always kind of wonder why anybody names a variety that's so hard to pronounce. I guess NIWAD is a name of an Indian chief in Colorado, and that's where the breeder's hometown is. So I would say that's a lot of that's a lot of pride. Chief Niwat. One thing to one thing to think about regarding black raspberry is uh, black raspberries are not as cold hardy as red raspberries. So if there is a severe winter like what we are experiencing or what we just went through. I guess we're not done with our winter yet, and very low winter temperatures, and the florikins could be damaged. So it will be interesting to see what this year will hold in terms of blackberry production. So Ohio's treasures, it's one of one of our own. Um, well, when I say one of our own, was released uh, by Mr. Dale Stokes. So it was developed for Ohio production and bred and well developed by one of our growers in cooperation with a professor who was affiliated with University of Maryland. And then just a few summer red raspberries, and so so we mentioned heritage and mentioned a few, and then prelude is kind of interesting. So it is a summer bearing variety with a little bit fall ever-bearing characteristics. So you will get a major summer crop, and you have a small fall crop, and so that's why it's one of the leading varieties in Ohio. And then Lauren, I think I'll skip those, and then Nova. Maybe Ryan, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, Nova is another good variety for well suited for kind of the Midwest area. The fruit on it is a little bit more firm, so that's kind of the nice thing. You think about raspberries as a pretty soft fruit, so Nova's kind of nice because the fruit itself is a little bit more firm. That'd give it a little bit more shelf life, if you're harvesting and not consuming right away, or if you're marketing off your farm or you're selling to other people, this would be a good fruit to add to your collection just because it's got a little bit more stability there. Um, Pretty vigorous growth. Again, just pretty good grower here for this area.
Yeah, it's one of the very popular varieties amongst the raspberry growers. And so Ryan and I, we have gone to Champagne Berry Farm quite a few times, and this is one of their favorite varieties. So I'm going to go through these varieties pretty quickly because of the time constraints. Um, it's very difficult to well, you have AC Eden, something to think about, and then Tulamine, we absolutely loved it uh, for our, long cane production study, but it's also just another common summer red raspberry, and absolutely love the fruits. In this rare case, Ryan ate some fruits, and I also ate some. So it's a very good, and then there are a few others, and Titan. Uh, yeah, let's talk about maybe cultural management. So with raspberries, and uh, typically you will purchase these these plants as a bare-rooted varieties. So some of them will come as a tissue culture plants, others will be nursery grown, really large, kind of dormant rooted plants. Anyways, and so it's so they look like this, and they have a pretty strong system. But make sure you purchase the virus indexed plants. Virus indexed plants just mean that they are free of viruses. So well, with gardeners, and sometimes folks share plants, and it's never a good idea to do that because the plants that you get may already come with viruses, and that will limit yield, and then also uh, uh, that will make the plants have very poor quality. So it's important to buy brand new plants from certified nurseries. So typical time to plant them is around late April to early May. And then sometimes well, the local garden centers will sell plants in containers. So if you get the plants in containers, you can pretty much plant them anytime when ground is not soggy wet. Um, so so the one thing that's kind of interesting is that if you plant bare-rooted plants, and so the new growth may not appear for like 4 to 6 weeks. And this is a little disheartening, like, holy Moses, what's going on? And how come nothing is coming out? And so, uh, so it's, just need to be patient, and which I'm not. And I always go and check with Ryan, like, hey, what's going on? And since he's not there now, and so I just go talk to myself, hey, Gary, what's going on? Still, uh, so may not do anything for 4 to 6 weeks, and then this thing is called a handle, and a lot of times there may not be anything coming from the handle itself, so you may have some buds coming from the base. So sometimes you could just cut these handles off. You could just wait, and there's no big hurry to cut any of them off. And the smaller tissue culture plants are okay too, but keep in mind that uh, their root balls are only like this, and it takes a long time for them to do anything. But with larger plantings, they are more economical. So planting distances, and maybe Ryan can talk about this. And
Sure. Yeah. With planting distances, and if you can think back the picture before, with red raspberries, typically we suggest anywhere from 2 to 3 feet apart. Um, with all of these, with exception of the black raspberries, all of these will eventually form a hedgerow. So, if you plant every 2 feet, your hedgerow is just going to close a little bit faster, and that in the long term, you think about it, weed management, that kind of stuff, the the shorter period of time that you get the canopy to close up, it's going to shade out any weeds underneath. Um, I always kind of go for the 2 foot for the red raspberries, just because you can get that hedgerow formed a lot quicker. And then if you can remember the picture of the root system, how the one root kind of took a sharp right turn, one of the best ways to plant these, the easiest way, is after you've made your raised bed, either by hand or with some piece of equipment, just to make a shallow furrow right down the middle of the bed, with a hoe or some sort of trowel. And then you can just put those plants right down in that furrow, making sure that all the roots are covered up. You don't necessarily want to bend that root all the way back down and plant it straight down in the ground, because what those roots are going to do, they're going to send up new shoots. So if you can keep it maintained at that 90-degree angle where you're putting those roots into that furrow, then that's going to send up shoots a lot quicker. Um, for the purple raspberries, anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, and then the black raspberries, they're more of a bunch forming, so they're kind of like blackberries in that respect, that they don't really form that hedgerow that you think of when you see red raspberries. So generally with those, every 3 to 4 feet. Kind of the nice thing about the black raspberries, if you want to put down some sort of landscape fabric or something to prevent weeds, you can do that with the black raspberries. Row spacing, I always say that that's just dependent on the equipment that you're using. If you're doing a commercial planting, it's whatever the size your tractor is or the piece of equipment that you're mowing in between those rows, you're driving through there to either harvest or spray. So the row spacing needs to be dependent on the equipment that you're using. If you're just putting in some rows in your backyard and your mower's 4 or 5 feet of mower deck, then you can put the rows a lot closer together than the 10, 12 feet. But it's really dependent on how you are operating that.
Very good, Ryan. And in terms of plant spacing, it also depends on how expensive, for commercial growers, it depends on how expensive the land value is. So the growers in California, where the land is so expensive, and so with red raspberries, and they will plant them maybe like 6 to 8 inches apart, so they can get huge very high yields very, very quickly to recover the cost. Anyways, so in Ohio, about 2 feet or so, that would be a good uh, uh, good distance. It also depends on whether you are using dormant bare-rooted plants or tissue culture plants. And tissue culture plants are less expensive. You can get them a little bit closer. And then, so this is what what they do in California. Just yeah, everything is so close, but that's because their land is so much well, it's kind of actually outrageous how expensive it is. So this picture came from Dr. Eric Hansen, and then just you have your floricane fruiting plants, and then you have blackberries, and then you have primocane varieties, kind of roughly in that order. And uh, so going through a few different varieties with pictures, and we are and so red raspberries for commercial growers, and we always recommend those that have bright red color. So the ones that turn kind of dark red and are not as good, because people always think that dark red is kind of an overripeness. And so keep the ones that are select the ones that are dark brightly red, and also that stay those that stay kind of bright red are much better. but sometimes you don't have a choice because the good varieties, uh, yeah, there's really no perfect variety. And then if you're wanting to extend a little bit, and there are a few other varieties, Encore is an interesting variety, and then you have a whole bunch of Primaking bearing varieties, Autumn Britain, and then Jacqueline. Uh, Jacqueline, there's quite a few that are varieties that are released through University of, well, actually originally from Rutgers, Dr. Joseph Viola. So Jacqueline was one of them. Josephine. Uh, so Ryan and I, we actually met Jacqueline, uh, or I met Jacqueline. How about you, Ryan? Have you met
Yeah,
Jacqueline when she was a graduate student here?
famous. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really neat. And then Polka, yeah, Polka, Joan Jay. We talk about these varieties, Caroline Heritage, Himbo Top, and Josephine. So when you have a choice, it's probably better to have these brightly colored fruits, bright red. Uh, so and then let's maybe talk about fertilization a little bit, and for commercial production, you still want to do a soil test, and so the standard recommendation for nitrogen is 60 to 80 pounds per acre, and for home gardeners and good old 10-10-10, good old 10-10-10 would be a good way to go. But it really depends on what your soil has. If it already has plenty of phosphorus and potassium, and all you need is nitrogen. So just soil, don't guess, and soil test. So this is kind of what the for phosphorus and potassium. These are the guidelines, but your soil may not be missing those, or maybe low in these nutrients. And so for commercial growers, and because their livelihood depends on this, and you can actually take tissue test. And so blackberries and raspberries, and they have compound leaves. So when you look at one leaf stem, and then they have like three to five different leaf blades, and those are called leaflets. And so you would take these leaf samples, and you can send them to soil testing lab. Uh, Many of the soil testing lab will test uh, tissue nutrient levels. So, so for commercial guys, and this is very important because not only what you need to know what's in the soil, you also want to know what's picked up by the plants. So I'm checking I'm kind of checking our time, and so fertilization once a year, typically in May. But for more serious folks, and they can fertilize them multiple times. And then you can check like, okay, are they missing nitrogen, or are they missing phosphorus and potassium and all that, and then there are much more detailed fertilizer recommendations, and so growers can take a tissue test. Um, for the sake of time, maybe we could just kind of stop here, and we didn't get to the pruning side, and I'm sure some of you have questions about pruning. Maybe Presley, we could start. This is 132. Maybe we could start answering some of the questions. Okay, did we lose Presley? Okay. Uh, so since Presley is not quite here yet, and we can just keep on going with uh, with the desired nutrient levels. And so these are much more detailed information than people need. So we can send you the PDF, a PDF version of our PowerPoint handout. Okay, let's talk about the talk about the uh, pruning a little bit. And Ryan, are you ready? Would you be able to talk a little bit about this?
Mhm. Yep. So with summer fruiting red raspberries, we keep going back to the terms floricane versus primocane. And oftentimes when you're purchasing plants, that's what they're going to be called fall bearing or summer bearing. And I always kind of, I have a hard time remembering, well, which is which. So the way I remember it, the fall, uh, I always want to say fall with floricane, but with the F's there, but that's not the case. So the fall bearing ones are the primocanes, so the ones that will fruit on that 1-year-old shoots. And then the summers are the floricane bearing ones. So you have got to keep that cane around for 2 years in order for it to fruit. So, so you've gotten your summer bearing raspberry into the second season, you've harvested some fruit from it. At that point, those canes will die naturally on their own. So you can either remove those canes after you harvest, whether it be in late summer or middle summer, or you can wait until late winter time to remove those as well. But after fruiting, those canes are no longer productive and those need to be removed. Best practices is just to remove them from the area. Don't leave them in the middle between your rows because that's typically where a lot of our fungal diseases will overwinter in the leaves or bark. So, if you're trying to maintain these plantings without spraying a lot of fungicides, then removing all that dead material from the area is going to help you out a lot. Good on that slide.
Yeah, I was just double checking to make sure that is the session being recorded? It's a little bit late to ask.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes me feel better now because I was checking the little button for recording. Okay, okay. So Presley is back, and and then so so just a little bit about pruning. Pruning, summer pruning. So there are two different approaches actually, and so the standard textbook approach is to remove spent floricanes at the ground level right after harvest. However, I have seen commercial growers just kind of leaving the spent floricanes all the way through the winter month, and then uh, just about now, and growers will use a track some kind of tractor attachment, and then they brush the top, and then the spent floricanes will just kind of fly off. So it's a good labor saving technique, and so even though the textbook says remove them right after harvest, and so the other approach is actually pretty good as well. And then also good news with that is, and all the nutrients will be recycled into the crowns, and uh, and then they will maybe could potentially help with plant cold hardiness, even though it might encourage a little bit disease formation. Uh, okay, so floricane, so floricane bearing variety. So uh, right now the growers are actually doing this. So you have a lot of way too many canes than necessary. So what they do is to chop off uh, a part of it and to reduce the fruit load, and then they will also thin the canes so you will not have too many of them. Uh, so go ahead, Ryan. Do you want to say a couple more words about this?
Yeah, so this is a really, really good picture just to show you what before and after looks like. And it can be pretty extreme, when you're going in and pruning a lot of these different fruit crops. But picture on the left, you can kind of see there towards the base that there's a lot of canes that have started to pop up outside the bed or outside kind of those two wires there that are containing those. Some of them are growing outside the wire. So when you're maintaining hedgerows like this, it's really ideal to really limit where those canes are coming up to keep them pretty concentrated in the middle of that bed. You're eventually probably going to see some coming out here into the sod walkway in between. So just, annually pushing that back, maintaining that pretty condensed hedgerow. And then as you go down the row, trying to limit how many canes. So you might have a crown of the original plant in this area that might be throwing up 8, 10 canes from that area. Well, it's really kind of a stressor. And you think that, well, if you leave all those, then you might get more fruit. But really, in a sense, they're kind of competing with each other when you leave too many canes. So ideally, if you can leave 4 to 5 per foot that are spaced out pretty evenly. I know in real life that's not always possible, but if you can find some really nice healthy canes that are, excuse me, a few inches apart from one another and not competing with each other for space, that's really ideal.
And then so if you grow you know primocane fall fruiting varieties in the past, while this even the current some growers will just mow all the canes in late winter, early spring, like March, and then that will turn them into 100% fall fruiting. So that's kind of a good way to do that. Well, it used to be the best way, and now because of the spotted wing Drosophila, and then fall crop will have more insects and more of the SWDs or spotted wing Drosophila. That may or may not be the best approach. And sometimes you can grow do what's called the double cropping. I'm looking for uh, uh, a good slide, and this is one of them. So so if you so instead of just cutting everything uh, to the ground level and then slightly above ground level you have one crop, and now if you want them to produce a late spring, early summer crop and a fall crop, and so what you do is you space these canes about 6 inches apart, 6 to 8 inches apart, and then just you can tell by color they're kind of reddish and salmon colored, and then the spent canes they're kind of grayish. So remove the ones that produce fruits last year, but the ones that are still good, they're reddish colored, and then you space them about 6 to 8 inches. And then you also want to maintain this little strip 18 to 24 inches because raspberries, especially primocane bearing varieties, are very, very invasive.